Ethan stood outside the towering glass building, clutching a worn leather folder in one hand and balancing his baby daughter, Lily, in the other. The morning was cold, and the drizzle only made his nerves worse. He hadn't planned on bringing her along, but when the babysitter canceled last minute, he had no choice. He whispered softly to Lily, who clung to his shirt, unaware of her father's storm of emotions. Inside that building waited the chance he had been dreaming of, a job that could turn their struggling life around. But he knew how unforgiving corporate halls could be. People judged quickly, often without knowing the battles others were fighting. As he pushed open the heavy glass door, he felt dozens of eyes immediately land on him. The polished lobby was filled with neatly dressed applicants, all seated with perfect posture, resumes neatly stacked in professional portfolios. Ethan, with his daughter on his hip and exhaustion written across his face, stood out like a misplaced puzzle piece. He could already feel the whispers, the stares, the quiet smirks. But he straightened his shoulders. He had faced harder things before, nights of hunger, days of rejection, years of trying to give Lily a life better than his own. If this interview was his shot at hope, then he wasn't going to let fear, or the weight of judgment, steal it away. Taking a deep breath, Ethan walked forward, every step echoing both his desperation and determination. The receptionist raised her eyebrows for a brief second but quickly forced a polite smile, directing Ethan to the row of applicants waiting their turn. As he sat down, Lily began to fidget, her tiny hands tugging at his tie and crumpling the neatly printed resume he had worked on the night before. A couple of people shuffled away to give him space, whispering behind their hands. One young man in a sleek navy suit smirked, muttering something about professionalism, loud enough for others to hear. A woman across the room sighed dramatically when Lily let out a small giggle, as if a child's laughter was out of place in a room built on ambition. Ethan kept his eyes down, bouncing Lily gently to keep her calm. His heart pounded with shame, but his love for his daughter was stronger. He whispered promises to her, promises that one day, she wouldn't have to see him judged like this. Just then, Lily reached up and placed her small palm on his cheek, her innocence shielding him from the weight of their stares. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about landing a job, it was about proving to himself, to his daughter, and maybe even to those silently judging him, that strength wasn't defined by a pressed suit or an empty hand. It was defined by resilience, by sacrifice, by love. Still, when the assistant finally called his name, a knot of dread twisted in his stomach. He stood, adjusted his shirt, and walked toward the interview room, unsure if he was heading toward opportunity or humiliation. Ethan entered the sleek conference room, its walls lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling city. At the far end of the long oak table sat the CEO, a poised woman in her 50s with sharp eyes softened by warmth. Her nameplate read Margaret Hayes. Ethan shifted nervously, adjusting Lily on his arm, ready to apologize before she could even speak. "Ms. Hayes, I'm so sorry for bringing my daughter. My sitter canceled, and I didn't want to miss this chance. I understand if," but before he could finish, Margaret stood and walked over, her heels clicking lightly against the polished floor. She didn't look at him with annoyance or judgment, instead, her gaze went straight to Lily, who blinked curiously at the new face. To Ethan's shock, Margaret gently extended her hands. "May I?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated, but Lily reached out without fear, and Margaret lifted her effortlessly, balancing the child on her hip as if she had done it 1,000 times. Then, with a smile that silenced the tension in the room, Margaret motioned for Ethan to sit. But instead of pointing him to a single chair, she called for the assistant outside the door. "Bring in another chair, please," she said. A moment later, 2 chairs were pulled up side by side, one for Ethan, one for Lily. The room, which had felt like a battlefield, suddenly felt like home. For the first time all day, Ethan's shoulders relaxed. This wasn't going to be the disaster he had feared. Something inside him whispered that this interview was about to be different, about to be human. Ethan sat down carefully, still half expecting the meeting to turn into a formality that would end in polite rejection. Yet Margaret leaned forward, still holding Lily comfortably, and said, "Tell me your story, not just your resume." "Who are you, Ethan?" No one had ever asked him that in an interview. His throat tightened as he tried to steady his voice. He spoke about losing his wife during childbirth, about learning to be both father and mother, about late nights working small jobs that barely covered rent. He admitted to moments of fear, to doubting whether he was enough for Lily, yet also to the fierce determination that had kept him moving forward. As he spoke, Margaret listened intently, her expression never once slipping into pity or impatience. Instead, there was respect, genuine respect. At one point, Lily reached for Ethan, and Margaret gently placed her back into his arms, smiling as though the gesture itself was part of the interview. Ethan continued, his voice gaining strength, explaining how every obstacle had taught him problem-solving, resilience, and empathy. Qualities no textbook could ever instill. By the time he finished, the room was silent, heavy with something far more profound than professional evaluation. Margaret folded her hands, her eyes glistening just slightly. "Ethan," she said softly, "you've already proven the very leadership skills we look for. You carry responsibility, you adapt under pressure, and above all, you never give up." Ethan blinked in disbelief, unsure if he had heard her correctly. For the first time in years, hope didn't just feel like a dream. It felt real, sitting right there in front of him. Ethan sat frozen, his heart pounding as Margaret's words sank in. He had expected skepticism, maybe even rejection, but never validation, never this kind of recognition. Then, Margaret leaned back slightly, her tone shifting from professional to personal. "When I was your daughter's age," she began, glancing warmly at Lily, "my father raised me alone. He worked 3 jobs, carried me to meetings, and faced the same stares you faced out there in the lobby. People thought he didn't belong, but he showed me strength looks different when built on love." Ethan felt his throat tighten, realizing this was more than an interview, it was a moment of shared truth. Margaret's voice softened further as she continued, "We need people like you in this company, people who understand sacrifice, resilience, and compassion. If you can lead your daughter through life with such devotion, I trust you can lead a team here." Ethan's hands trembled, gripping Lily closer as tears welled in his eyes. He opened his mouth to thank her, but she wasn't finished. "Starting today," Margaret said, sliding an offer letter across the table, "this company will support not just you, but your daughter too. Flexible hours, on-site childcare, and every chance you need to thrive." Ethan's breath caught. For so long, life had been about surviving, scraping through each day. But now, for the first time, he felt the ground beneath him turning solid, safe. Lily, as if sensing the weight of the moment, clapped her tiny hands together, filling the room with innocent joy. Margaret laughed softly, and in that sound was the promise of new beginnings. When Ethan walked out of the building later that afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds, warming the city streets with golden light. He held Lily close, tears still stinging his eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or shame. They were from gratitude. He had walked in carrying the weight of judgment and uncertainty, yet he was leaving with more than just a job, he was leaving with dignity restored and a future secured. As he stepped past the lobby, the same applicants who had once whispered now stared in quiet disbelief. Ethan didn't hold their looks against them, instead, he silently hoped that one day, they too would understand the power of empathy. Outside, he kissed Lily's forehead, whispering, "We did it, baby girl." And though she couldn't understand the words, she giggled, her laughter echoing like music against the tall glass walls behind them. That sound reminded Ethan that no matter how dark the nights had been, there would always be mornings like this, moments where kindness broke through like sunlight. In an age where competition often overshadowed compassion, Margaret Hayes had proven that true leadership was not about power, but about humanity. Ethan vowed to carry that lesson forward, not just as an employee, but as a father, a friend, and one day, perhaps even as a mentor to someone else standing where he once stood. The world didn't change in grand gestures alone, it changed in moments like these, where a single act of understanding could alter the course of 2 lives forever.